Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to our council meeting of Wednesday the 29th of June 2022. Welcome to those online as well. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the agenda proper. Look, the meeting has been recorded, it has been live streamed on our council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, I'll just get the screen up. You're all familiar with the building in terms of the unlikely event of an emergency that we evacuate via the green signs, which you're all aware of, and we assemble at the clock tower. The building is obviously a non-smoking facility, unlike the event in the need of a defibrillator that is located in the front of house, and everyone knows where the toilets are. And the link span there at the end of the link span. We have, obviously, we're still at the COVID-19 protection framework, and just ask everybody to follow those protocols. And for our online participants, and we have councillors Bowen, Dingwall, Johnson, and Councillor Butt, and Councillor Naylor. If I could ask you to keep your cameras on where possible and microphones muted unless you're addressing the meeting. To any presenters and officers, staff, if you could please just in your first instance just announce who you are and your role, and then everybody can understand online. Okay, right, we will go to our first order of business. That's apologies, and I haven't received any apologies, so we will move forward. Any late items and additional items? I haven't received any. There's none from the floor. Declarations of interest. Again, I haven't received any for today. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to number 4, which is just a presentation on behalf of Council to local recipients of the Queen's Birthday Honours List 2022, and that's on page 7 of your papers. So I'll just briefly speak to that and then just ask if there's any comments. So we have Mr. Roderick Christopher Dominic John Pawlowski, and Rod has been awarded an Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to football. Mr. Pawlowski has contributed to football at a local, national and international level in administration and advisory roles since 1981. At a regional level, Mr. Pawlowski started at the Hawke's Bay and held leadership roles within Hawke's Bay Football, Central Regional League, and then the Horowhenua Football Association. He chaired the Central Football Federation from 2006 to 2010. He was a member of the New Zealand Football Coaching Committee from 1983 to 1992. He has contributed significantly to the progress and learning of football referees, assessing and supporting their development from a local level up to a national and international level. He has been a New Zealand Football National League referee assessor since 2005 and was a Football Australia A-League referee from 2011 to 2017. In 2016, he was the referee assessor for the FIFA Nations Cup. He developed key relationships to establish an annual exchange program with Football New Zealand referees to train alongside professional game match officials from England. He chaired the New Zealand Football Referees Committee from 2001 to 2011 and has been chair of the appointments panel since 2011. He chaired the New Zealand Football Match Officials Incorporated from 2016 to 2021. Mr. Pawlowski's broader contributions to sport included 3 years as a foundation trustee of Sport Hawke's Bay and 10 years as a trustee of Sport Manawatu. So congratulations to him. Our next recipient is Dr. Anne Katrine Robertson. She has been awarded an Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to sexual health. Dr. Robertson has been contributing to sexual health services in New Zealand for more than 24 years. Dr. Robertson has been supporting the sustainability of sexual health and sexual assault services in New Zealand and improving the sexual health outcomes for people as the current president of the New Zealand Sexual Health Society in Australasia, as previous president of the Australasian chapter of the Sexual Health Medicine and the Asia Pacific region through committee membership of the International Union Against STI. She was the Mid-Central DHB's regional coordinator for medical sexual assault clinicians, Aotearoa, from 1990 to 2014, helping create a 24-hour roster for provision of sexual assault therapeutic and forensic care in the Mid-Central region for children, adolescents and adults. She's been a specialist obstetrician and gynaecologist at Palmerston Hospital since 1988 and a specialist sexual health physician since 1998, focusing on developing new innovative ways to keep the services of client-focused and relevant in changing times. She has been providing specialist sexual health physician services in Hawke's Bay DHB since 2012 and more recently support to the Wanganui DHB. Dr. Robertson has been a director of the Sexually Transmitted Infections Education Foundation, Aotearoa, since 2011 and is co-lead author of the New Zealand HPV project and the New Zealand Herpes Foundation. So congratulations to Dr. Robertson. And finally, Dr. Ian Alexander Noel Stringer, again an officer, been made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to conservation. Dr. Stringer taught invertebrate zoology at Massey University between 1974 and 2002 before becoming a scientist with the Department of Conservation until his retirement in 2012. Dr. Stringer contributed to the development of several key courses in the Bachelor of Science and Masters of Science degrees in zoology. He supervised many postgraduate students. His research both at Massey University and the Department of Conservation was largely based in the field of involving leading teams of professionals and volunteers that investigated endangered giant land snails and the iconic and critically endangered Mercury Islands tusked weta. The research provided vital information for their effective protection, and the tusked weta were established on other islands where rats had been eradicated, almost certainly saving them from extinction. At DOC, he provided conservation advice, surveyed insect communities, and chaired groups of experts that evaluated conservation status of known terrestrial invertebrates in New Zealand, from butterflies and fleas to earthworms. This, together with all of Dr. Stringer's research, has been published in many scientific journals accessible to the wider community. And congratulations to Dr. Stringer. I'll open it up if there are any comments. There being none, we will look to resolve that the Council congratulations will be conveyed on behalf of Council to the local recipients of the Queen's Birthday Honours 2022. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Again, if there's no further comments, we'll look to vote. Thank you. Could we just please check that you've voted? It's me. Sorry. All right, that's passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. Okay, we look to confirmation of the minutes that Council resolves that the minutes of the Council meeting of the 1st of June 2022, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. And they're on page 11 of your papers. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising from that? All right, before we vote, I just wanted to comment just on item 5322, and that was around the international travel, and just would have to say that I was just a fraction disappointed that not one councillor, including the Deputy Mayor, came and spoke to me before you had that pretty important vote, and there has been some unforeseen consequences of that and damage control. So it'd be nice to have a little bit of contact with my colleagues when we do that next time. I didn't think I needed to talk to you about it, but it was just disappointing that nobody, not one of you except one councillor, came and spoke to me about it beforehand. And the damage control has been put in place and we'll repair that, but it would have been nice to have had some discussion with my colleagues before you made your decisions and comments. So, look, we'll look to move this, so if we could vote, please. And that is passed 15-4 with one abstention. Right, we move through to our reports, and the first one is around the presentation of Part 1 Public Committee of Council recommendations from the 26th of May 2022 meeting, and that's on page 19, councillors, of your papers. And this is really approving the deliberations and debate that we had, and it includes those amendments around clauses. How many are there? Yeah. I'm not going to read them out because I assume everybody's got their papers. I think that would be a rather foolish attempt. So we'll just say there's a number of clauses there. I'm happy to open it up for any comments. Before we go there, we should really move them. So I'll look to move those. And I have a seconder from the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson online.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. If we've got comments about the overall budget, are we saving those for the next item? Which is the adoption of the annual budget, item 7?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, because I did ask everybody if they would hold their, or keep their powder dry until we discuss this in totality. So this is around the deliberation, so it's really clear what we're doing is around our recommendations from that 26th of May meeting. So they're being, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to ask if you could separate number 3 and 4 in item 2222 and also 3022.
Okay, we'll just give the tech team, admin team, a second to be able to do that. So just repeating, that's on clause 2222, which is around rating, number 1 and number 2.
Yes.
And then what was the second one?
3022.
3022, which is actions proposed to direct response to submissions. And what numbers?
Just that whole section.
The whole section, okay.
I'm presuming if you were going to take the vote for all of these at once.
Yes, we were.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, well, what we'll do is we'll get those up first and then we'll do the rest as a substantive, if that's okay. Yep, just give the admin team a while.
Okay, just to be clear, the 2222, it's the third and fourth items that I would like to vote differently on.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought it was 1 and 2, so it's 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
We're just getting that sorted now.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. The 3022, it was just number 1 that I wanted to vote differently. Apologies for that.
Okay, what we'll do is we'll go through clause 2222, which is around rating and separating out recommendations 3 and 4. We'll do that one first, and then we'll come to the second one, and then we'll do a substantive for the rest. Okay, so look, we've got Committee of Council from the 26th of May meeting. Council resolves clause 2222 rating, recommendations 3 and 4. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. And Councillor Naylor.
Just briefly to say, I just wanted to vote consistently today to what I voted in May, just that my reasons for voting haven't changed. In terms of the uniform annual general charge, I recognise the desire to try and mitigate the impact of the revaluations. However, the negative impact that does have on the non-residential properties, I'm still not comfortable with. And I do suspect that some in the commercial sector will be quite surprised at the increase that they end up with as a result of some of these changes. So I will be voting against that because of those reasons.
Okay. Right, there are no further comments. I might just do a quick little right of reply. Councillors, as we know, there was a lot of levers we were pulling, and it's incredibly hard. And I think the key word here is balance. And I think with the officer advice around the UAG charge, we took that as what we could do to move and equalise some of these rate increases. Nothing's perfect, but I do think that's probably the better way to go rather than keeping it at what was proposed at 300. So, and around the Valuer General expressing frustration, absolutely we need to do that. And I'm just waiting for staff to produce that letter for us for some comment and then signing. I also want to remind people and the commitment given by officers that if individual ratepayers still have concerns, they can come to the officers. That was a deliberate offer from the officers, so I want to put that on record, and hopefully that's picked up in the wider media, that if there are frustrations and they feel that there has been some sort of discrepancy, then they can come to our rating officers, and those will be double checked and triple checked to ensure that we have got all the calculations, valuations and everything 100% correct. So that was an offer that was made, and we've just got to remember that as well. So we will look to vote on this, please. And that has passed 15 votes for and 1 against. Right, we'll look at the other separated clause, which was clause 30-22, actions proposed in direct response to submitters, and that was around recommendation 1. And I'll ask for any comments. Councillor Naylor.
Apologies, I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I don't think unless there's actually some comment from Councillor Naylor who's raised this, I don't really think there's any purpose for me to actually respond at all, other than to say that this particular program has provided immense benefits to our CBD and support for not only visitors but businesses within the CBD, and it has alleviated a number of social issues that are prevalent throughout the summer. So please just vote for this. Thank you. Support it.
Just as a right of reply, again, like Councillor Hancock, this has had a real impact for us, and I know that the majority of you voted for it, and I'd hope that you'd see that it was beneficial in the bigger scheme of safety in our city. So we will look to vote, please. And that has passed 14 votes for and 2 against. Okay, we'll now go to the substantive, which includes clauses 21-22 around the annual budget moving forward, the remainder of 22-22 around rating, clause 23-22, which is the one-off operating programs, clause 24-22, which is around operational budget changes, and that continues to 26-22 around operational budget changes, 27-22, which is the capital new programs, and 28-22, the capital budget changes renewal programs, and then finally 29-22, which is the capital budget changes, and the remainder of finally clauses 30-22 around actions in direct response to submissions and changes to assumptions, clause 31-22. So we've moved those. just doing a little bit of tidying up around admin. Okay, I'll ask for any comments around this. All right, we will look to vote, please. Okay, that's passed. 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we now move through to the main part of the meeting, which is around the adoption of the annual budget and plan for 2022-23. And that was a presentation of Part 1 Public Committee of Council recommendations from the 15th of June 2022 meeting. It's on page 25 of your papers, councillors, and it includes the adoption of the annual plan budget that we resolve clause 34-22 around the new animal shelter building and the increase to budget. Recommendation 1, it's around clause 35-22, finalising the annual budget plan for 2022-23. Recommendations 1 to 6 from the Committee of Council meeting 15th of June 2022. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. This is your time to comment, councillors, if you want to. Right, Councillor Dennison.
Mr Mayor, I don't wish to speak, but I do request that 34-22 be separated. I wish to vote against that. I made my views known at that committee meeting.
Great, that's fine. Thank you. We'll do that first. And does anyone want to speak specifically to this? Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I was just in the queue to speak on the adoption of the annual budget. I didn't realise you were going to take them separately, so.
Okay, all right, it's fine.
So are you just taking comments on 34-22
yes,
at the moment?
Just 34-22, so if there's any comments on that you wish to pass.
No, I think I've said enough on that, really. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, nobody else wishes to comment on this? Okay, I'm not going to comment other than it is quite a sticky place, but we are legislated to do this, so I think we've all had quite enough to say on the matter earlier on. So I'll now ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 12 votes for and 4 against. Could we just double, we're just going to admin there. Could we just check, is that? Yes.
This is just not showing the correct voting.
Yeah. Yeah, but the 4 that are voted against, that's probably an important part. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Right, we will move through to the more substantive, which is around clause 35-22, around finalising the annual budget. Recommendations 1 to 6. And yes, and that's it. So Councillors, this is the time to comment. It's been moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open the floor up. Councillor Naylor.
Mr. Mayor, I did also have a question that I had asked at the meeting 2 weeks ago that hasn't been able to be answered yet. I'm just wondering, would now be, in terms of the potential size of the carry forwards for the capital program for this year. Now, is it possible to get an answer to that question now, Mr. Mayor?
I'm looking at the officers and somebody's going to comment. Cam's going to comment.
I'll start, and the Chief Infrastructure Officer may want to chip in if she wishes. So just in terms of process, so the team at the moment are working through finalising the spend for the year as part of the annual report process. So they're working through that currently. And as circulated in a response, we have had some challenges due to weather and other things this month that may mean that we don't quite hit where we were expecting to hit. But that will be all worked through, and we'll be questioning those carry forwards that then come forward to you in the August meeting as per the final quarter report for the year at that time.
Apologies, I probably should have been a little bit more specific. So specifically the question that I asked 2 weeks ago that I'm still awaiting an answer on is what was the full amount that we were expecting to hit? Because we were told that there wouldn't be any carry forwards when I asked the question two weeks ago. I understand that the email said that we will probably deliver around 45 to 47 million. However, what my question is what is the total capital estimate that was estimated to be delivered? Is it 60 million or is it 65.5 million? I've still been awaiting an answer for that, because that is really what would determine the difference between 45. I mean, is it 15 to 20 million that we're expecting to carry forward, or what is the estimated size of what we are likely to carry forward?
I'll ask for a response.
Sarah Sinclair, Chief Infrastructure Officer. Through the Chair, the 60 million that you're referring to, Councillor Naylor, was the forecast spend to the end of the year in February. It was forecast in February before the actual effect of COVID as an illness, as opposed to the pandemic that we were seeking to control and that was impacting our borders and stuff. So once the pandemic had hit, we revised our forecast to the end of the year. So the forecast to the end of the year is approximately 49 million. Because we went through a double sort of change in forecast, one where we took more into the carry forward at that time because of the impacts on our deliverability, because of all of our supply chain being so directly affected by COVID. We made another change in May when it became clear that the decision making for some of the things like the animal shelter would move those projects into the next financial year. So that 60 million was current in February, but it wasn't current by the time we reported to you what the carry forwards were at the May meeting. The forecast to the end of the year had changed.
Sorry, I do realise some of those changes. I'm really struggling to get a clear answer here. The May month-end financial report that was circulated to elected members, I think last week or the week before, still had the capital program at 60 million, and that talked about the infrastructure capital program. So we had $105 million capital program, and we carried forward 39, which left 65.5. And to this date, I haven't seen a schedule come through with a further 25 million carried forward. And I'm really quite concerned about how we're tracking this. If we're at 49, when did that other 15 or 16 million come out of the capital program, and where is that identified in any of our papers to approve? Through
the chair, thank you for clarifying your question. Hopefully I can clarify back in response. The 60 million was the formal financial forecast from February. So that's the formal forecast that's sort of in the books for the finance team to be working on as a formal forecast. It's not the predicted spend which we change on a monthly basis. So the information that came to you in the May reports that came to you for decision making identified the carry forwards into the 22-23 year that were current. The issue is that the figure of 60 million that was in the May report was referring to a formal official financial forecast, which wasn't the same as the predicted spend at the end of the year at that time.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask perhaps for a comment from the Chief Financial Advisor, because there's some quite significant discrepancies in the information we've been provided, and I'm quite concerned that we do actually get an accurate, if there has been another 16 odd million carried forward, when has that been identified and approved by council? Because I certainly haven't seen it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what has been in front of you in terms of carry forwards included to date is basically the most up-to-date information that we had at the time when it came to you in May. Now, in terms of what we are working on at the moment, obviously we've had May and June months of construction, so we would expect that there will be some fluctuations in that carry forward amount based on the response given by the CE and Chief Information Officer in terms of the email response. The final figure that we're working on, we're closing that out now, so we can't give you a definite, this is the total carry forward for the year until we've basically paid all the bills, if that makes sense to you.
I'm really well aware that I'm not expecting an exact figure, and I realise that'll take some time to define. But when we're sort of 15 or 16 million out in terms of the information that's been given to council, I think we should have a clear idea of whether we're looking at 2 million or 15 million in terms of carry forward, or an estimate of carry forwards. I think it's really important at this point, given the size of our capital program that is in our annual budget, to have a clear idea about how much of our capital program is likely to be brought forward into the 22-23 year. Are we looking at just 2 or 3 million, or are we looking at 15 to 20 million? I mean, can someone give me an approximate?
Yes.
Through the chair, Sarah Sinclair, Chief Infrastructure Officer. I did get a promotion a minute ago. Yes, it's very much of the order of, if there's going to be carry forward at all, it will be of the order of 2 million. Our entire predicted spend for June is 7-point-something million. So everything other than that was in the carry forward sum that you got in your papers as part of your decision making for the budget. So if there's a carry forward because of the bad weather this month, it will be of the order of 1 to 2 million, definitely not 15 to 20 million, because our entire budget for June is about 7 and a bit.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I know we carried forward 39 of the 105 million in March, and that left 65 million. Where is the other 15 or 16 million carry forward identified in any paper that has come to council for council's approval? If it's now at 49, how did we get from 65 to 49 of the 21-22 capital program?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think where the confusion is in terms of the May monthly report that you've received, works off the formal locked-in forecast as of February, whereas what the information that you've got at May for the Committee of Council has been through working through the deliverability and spend to date that the infrastructure unit has spent. So we've used that latest information for the purpose of the annual budget as opposed to the formal forecast, and we haven't revisited that forecast since February.
So the forecast in February was around 60 to 65 million though, wasn't it? And today we're being told it's 49 million. So I'm still really struggling to understand where that 15 or 16 million has been identified to be carried forward since March, because there wasn't a significant schedule in May that came to us with further carry forwards that I'm aware of.
My understanding is that the 39 to 40 million carry forward that's included in the Committee of Council papers includes the carry forwards that we know of, bar the 2 to 3 million or so that the Chief Infrastructure Officer has referred to.
Okay, look, we'll park that. I'll be honest, haven't got a lot of clarity either. And it is a little bit of a concern, and I would urge the officers to get on top of it. Could I ask the Chief Infrastructure Officer, so and it is what it is, but what is your percentage combined? What are we 49, 50% of completion against your budget? Or, just so we've got some sort of clarity on that.
Through the Chair, it varies for capital new and capital renewals.
Yep. So, okay, well, if you're capital, what's the capital and then what's the renewal? Are you 70% of renewals or 80 or what are you? We should have that information at hand.
I know, I've got it upstairs actually. If you give me 10 minutes, I'll go and get it and bring it back. But I can tell you that the
Does the organisation know it rather than just you?
Yeah, it's yes, but we can go and get it. We can go. If
somebody could, I think that's quite important.
It's worth noting that in the capital, because one of the issues for capital new, one of the issues that we raised was that part of the reason that we don't spend a lot of the capital new every year is because historically we've put growth into our capital new budget, which then doesn't necessarily occur because the developers don't need the infrastructure at the time. So we've actually separated
We understand that. Thanks, Sarah.
We've actually separated out the growth budget, I can tell you, we spent 4% of the growth budget.
Yep. It's not undifferent to past years either. So.
No. But we have changed it this coming year. We've moved a lot more of the growth out further. So that's the figure that stuck in my head, the 4% for growth.
Okay, all right. Well, can somebody go and get those, please, with some urgency? All right, there's people want to speak, and I'll let them speak. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to make some general comments about the annual budget, which I probably would have met at the other meeting, but we were a bit short on time. So I just, on reflection, think this has probably been a particularly difficult environment for decision making this year. Not only have we had rising costs, complications and difficulties of prediction because of COVID and supply chains and so on, but it's also fallen on a particularly difficult result of revaluation for residential ratepayers. And so all of that has made it, I have thought, a very challenging decision-making environment. So, on reflection, I think there were two key messages that came through the submissions. The first one was that many people were facing unaffordable increases that were primarily as a result of the effects of revaluation. And there were also a large number of people calling for us to change the basis of rating to capital value. And certainly in terms of the second theme that was coming through around capital value, we have made a decision in principle to move to capital value, but we were unable to enact it for this annual budget. And I know that there were some elected members a little bit sceptical about whether or not there was really much community support for moving to capital value, but I think that came through loud and clear that had we had a capital value rating system in place right now, we wouldn't have been looking at such a difficult environment for residential ratepayers, and particularly those from the more modest end of town. So I hope people do keep that in mind when we're considering changes to the rating system going forward. Anyway, in response to those submissions, we looked quite hard, I feel, at what tools we had, or as the Mayor would say, what levers we could pull to change things. And what we found were several things that we could change, although perhaps not as much or to the greatest effect that we would have liked. Certainly altering the differential so that residential ratepayers would, as a group, pay a lesser proportion of the rates has had an effect. Reducing the UAGC has meant that those in modest properties at the lower end of the market would pay less. Using the surplus to reduce the overall rates requirement next year has meant that everybody is subject to a lower rates increase. And I do want to thank colleagues and staff for their patience and dedication to this. You know, we went through the budget line by line. It took us 2 whole days. And, looking at that in summary, we managed to reduce 17 operational programs and deferred millions of dollars worth of capital expenditure. And that was not insignificant changes. And I know, not all of us agreed with all of them, and some of us perhaps would have liked it to have gone further. But I do want to thank colleagues for their patience in doing that, because I do think it's brought us to a place where the total rates increase has reduced from 8.3 to 5.8, and that in itself provides some relief for residential and commercial ratepayers. But we were not solely focused on cutting. We also allowed for some small increases in response to submissions, particularly the footpath maintenance and the City Ambassador programme. So where have we got to now, I suppose? What's the outcome of all of this? I think, on balance, I'm happy with the outcome. The average ratepayer will get an increase of $131 for the year, or $2.52 a week. Now, I know that averages can cover a lot of variation, and particularly so this year. What hasn't been really talked about much is that just under 8,000 households, by my calculation, will get a reduction in their rates. And another 8,000 or so will get an increase for the year of under $200. And we've managed, with all of these levers that we've pulled, we've managed to halve the number of households who would have been looking at an increase of over 15% in their rates. So we haven't managed to get everybody down under 15%. And I don't think there was any more that we could have done in that respect. But we have significantly reduced the number of households that would have been subject to a huge increase. And we've done all that, still being able to meet our obligations to provide for the 4 well-beings, which for me is a very important element of the budget. We do focus very much on budget lines and the cost of everything, but we also have to make sure that we're meeting our obligations to the community in terms of providing for well-being. And I think that we've managed to do this. We've done it all really carefully, which I have appreciated, although it was painstaking. And we've done it in a way that allows us, for the most part, to maintain services and to continue to invest in the city in areas that are important, like support for community, environmental projects and active transport and so on. And we've held our nerve during probably the most difficult times facing local government for many decades, actually. So I'm happy with where we've landed. I think we've done our absolute best to mitigate some of the unfortunate effects of revaluation. And I'm grateful to elected members around the table and staff for the huge amount of work and input and support that it's taken. So I hope you will all support the budget. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and apologies for a slightly scratchy voice. I was busy cheering the Jets on to another thrilling victory last night, and I think my voice is the worst for it.
Is that an increase to the basketball budget, is it?
Look, a heck of a lot's changed since the long-term plan and since we set off through our first workshops and community consultation. And, you know, for me, reflecting on that journey is an excellent reminder of why we do consultation with our community when we make big decisions like setting budgets. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the many staunch members of our community who were very frank with us about the sorts of issues that were being created and the sort of solutions that they expected to see. That was very, very helpful, and that it showed us exactly where some of the issues were. And certainly in my view, something's quite deeply wrong when those that have the least ability to pay face some of the biggest increases. So fortunately, we were able to fix some of that, both by cutting the budget back and by leveling out some of that lumpiness that was really causing most of the angst. Think of all the changes that we made. I'm most pleased that the flat tax portion, I'll call it what it is, not a UAGC, but the flat tax portion of what we actually run through our rating system has been trimmed back, and also that we were able to spread the rates more fairly using the differentials. With all the headwinds from inflation, et cetera, we also had to do some cuts, obviously, and I'd particularly want to acknowledge the work of staff in bringing us a number of iterations and options for trimming the budget, and would also like to acknowledge Councillors Naylor and Johnson in particular for doing and leading a lot of that work and discussion through 2 quite long days to actually bring us some line-by-line options to consider. We went a bit further than that and did something I hope we only do once in this city's history, or at least into the future, and that's spending the unspent of FY22 on FY23 rather than repaying debt. That would be quite a bad habit to get into from my point of view, but it is a step that I will support this year. After all that, of course, we're still facing a rates increase. And that's kind of the nasty thing about all these inflationary headwinds and all that. We end up doing less with more, which is kind of painful actually, but it's the reality that we're in. All up, the cuts and smoothing that we did has been a huge help. So we consulted on an 11.2% rise for residential on average. Again, this is talking averages and noting that there are a lot of variations hidden within that. But 11.2% for residential, which was huge. That's now been cut back to 4.6% for residential, a much more palatable sum. Again, thanks to the community feedback. And at the lower end of the property market, just 2.2%, which I think is, again, very good to be in line with ability to pay. So I think we can, hand on heart, say that we've responded strongly and effectively to the feedback that's come through. The flip side of that, of course, is that somebody has needed to pick up some of that slack, and so on the commercial and industrial side, we were at minus 3.5% actually in the proposal, That's gone up to 3%, and I think for me, a 3% rates rise for the non-residential sector is actually quite fair and reasonable in the times we face. And I wanted to really acknowledge the Manawatu Business Chamber in their speaking on behalf of the business community in the submissions hearings, and they were clear with us about they had a view that the local business community would see it as fair and reasonable to make some contribution towards the increasing budget in the year ahead. So it has been a heck of a long journey, one that I'm quite glad we're near to the end of, actually. Overall, my view is that while we're in these quite challenging times, this is a budget that is the right size. It's the budget that funds the work that we most need to deliver for our city's future. Obviously, there's areas where we have yet to invest to the scale we need to. I think of things like our response around climate change, et cetera, but those are conversations for other days. So in terms of where we're at now, a huge thanks again to the staunch members of our community that have had their say, to the staff that have done a heck of a lot of work over, I'm sure, many late nights, weekends, et cetera, to bring us information and options, and to colleagues for their work in this regard. And I'd certainly commend this budget to you all and to the wider community. It sets us up well for the year ahead.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also would like to thank officers for the tremendous amount of work that's gone into this process, and also want to acknowledge elected members who have listened to our community and responded to the submissions. I do acknowledge that, as others have outlined, we were given a pretty difficult position to begin with, and I believe we have made some significant changes that will have a positive impact on many ratepayers. In terms of the way that the things that we've done to mitigate the disproportionate impact of the revaluations on rates increases. However, when I look at where we've arrived at, I am in the difficult position where I am not comfortable to approve the annual budget. There's a couple of reasons for that. Despite the many changes that we made and reductions that we made, we also made a number of increases to the point that our overall expenditure, our overall operating expenditure has gone up to $2 million from the draft that we consulted on. And our capital program has also increased on what we consulted on. I am glad that the actual increase to many residential ratepayers is less. However, in the current environment, with the escalation in cost of living costs, I am still really uncomfortable with the level of increase that some of our ratepayers will have. Some of them over 16%, some of them over 25%. And I think that there's more that we could have done. Councillor Barrett talked about that we'll be doing less with more money. Actually, we're trying to do a whole lot more than we've ever done before when I'm talking specifically about our capital program now. Embarking on a $96.7 million capital program is about a 50% increase on what we've ever delivered before. It's also possibly around double what we've delivered this year. And as I said a couple of weeks ago, the impacts of COVID will not end, sadly, tomorrow. The impacts of COVID will go on into the 22-23 year. So it's foolish of us to embark on a program that's 50% more than we've ever delivered before in a year that will still have constraints, will still have significant challenges in terms of deliverability. There's two main reasons why I think it's unwise for us to progress a capital program that big. One being that I don't think it's realistic in terms of delivery, and I don't think it's affordable for our ratepayers. I think often as elected members, we focus too much on the first year impact. We need to remember that with increased interest rates, and the full impact of the interest costs of that debt, that comes in year 2 and 3 and beyond. The impact to the 22-23 year may be minimal in terms of the increase in capital, the size of the capital program, but it does exist, and it is, we will be charging our ratepayers for a capital program that is simply unrealistic to deliver. And I guess that's the main area that I have found quite disappointing. I'm also a little bit concerned about perhaps the quality of some of the information that's coming to us in terms of the financials and the way that we're tracking our current capital program. And I think I'd like to see some improvement in the clarity of information that's given to elected members about what we're carrying forward, what we are expecting to deliver, and the percentages. If we deliver $45 to $47 million in this current year, that's a 42 to 44% delivery on our total program for last year. Anyway, look, I've probably said enough, but I just felt I needed to explain my reasons for voting against this annual budget. Thank you.
Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a couple of brief words. I just want to say that we really appreciate going out, the council officers getting us prepared to go out into an environment where we had COVID, and we actually went out and consulted in that environment. It wasn't an easy environment to consult in, and the officers supported us doing that and doing that all online. I think we did a very good job of that, so thank you to the officers for helping us do that. And then coming back in and then going through a process of making all the cuts. We really appreciate all the work that the officers did to put a lot of effort in to do all the cuts that we had to do. So thank you to the officers for doing that to us, for us. I will support this budget. We have gone through this several times, and I do think it's a budget it's worth supporting, and I don't think it's worth re-litigating again and again. We have gone through this several times, and I do think it's time for us to put it to bed, to support it, and to move on to July 1 and go forward. And I think the officers have given us an assurance that they can deliver this budget for next year. We need to give our faith to them, and they need to give us transparency back that they will deliver it to us, and give us some assurance that they can deliver it to us, and give us some that we're going to actually see that in the reports back to us. So thank you for that, and we will hopefully see that being reported back through the Infrastructure Committee next term. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to support this budget. I agree with quite a lot of the comments that have been said so far, and I think for me, this has been a really, really challenging budget. As everyone has said, we've all struggled with this particular budget for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned. We have, as councillors and as leaders of our community, have huge responsibilities in this space, not only to look after our community now, but to look after our community years from now. And we're just constantly faced with extra responsibilities put on us by central government as well, and all of the dramas that entails, with not much of the funding that entails. So there's a huge amount of pressure on us at the moment to make sure that we are making the right decisions for our community. And I think a couple of the ones that are still fresh in my mind that we haven't managed to, I guess, do enough on, but it is what it is the whole thing around Three Waters, which, will have an impact on our budgets at the moment. The whole thing around earthquake strengthening, which we're still having to face, and the whole thing around climate change. So we still have massive issues that we're going to be facing in the future. And one of the dangers that we have is if we end up doing a slash and burn budget constantly, we just keep pushing these issues further and further down the road and things never ever get sorted out. So I'm really pleased that with this particular budget, we have given it huge amounts of thought. We have spent hours debating, and we've actually come to a balanced position. And so there's a lot more that that we're still going to have to face in the future years. And if we keep cutting any further than we already have, the future generations will be feeling it. Future councils will be feeling it. It just gets worse. So I feel like we have reached a good, balanced position. I'm not happy about it, but I think it is what it is, and I am going to support this one. And I think the biggest thing that we have at the moment that we really, really do need to keep an eye on is our people, and making sure that we have enough resources for our staff to be able to do the work that they need to do, and making sure that we are looking after, their health and safety needs and those kinds of things. Our people are our biggest resource actually right now. And so I think right now we are balanced, and I would not like to see it go any lower than this. So I'm happy to support this budget as it stands right now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, outside influences have affected this budget, I think, more than anything else, as far as the amount of rates that some ratepayers are going to have to pay. I know of some people that are going to have a 30% increase on their rates from last year. What does concern me is how much longer people on low incomes can afford rate increases of this sort of that we're putting onto them. I look at people on superannuation. Some of them are paying $130 a fortnight rates to this city council out of their super each fortnight. Some of the side effects of this is older people, particularly those who don't have other sources of income, are being forced into looking at borrowing and finding other ways of paying their rates. A perfect example of this is that to get a reverse mortgage now, there's a 5 to 6 week waiting list. That's for a reverse mortgage. Older people are being forced into a corner. They can no longer continue to absorb huge rate increases. I think we as a council need to be aware of this, and the government most certainly needs to be aware of it, because they have done little to nothing to address the problem. I will support it reluctantly, because I know the city needs this rate increase. But I am very concerned about the people on low incomes and how they're going to survive in the coming years.
Councillors, look, I reluctantly will support this as well. I just want to thank the staff and you all for what has been my most difficult annual plan, actually, since I've been around this table. And look, the revaluations did us no favours at all. I don't think anybody's jumping for joy around the revaluations, because you just get stung in whatever market you're trying to sell or buy on. Look, we have done well. We had very few levers to pull, and I think that should be acknowledged and hopefully is picked up in the media. We went out with an 8.3 general rate increase, and clearly in the times we're in at the moment, like Councillor Finlay said, it's really affecting a lot of people. So there's no way we could bravely bat on with that. That would be very foolish. So we had some options, and I thought we did pretty well to get to 5.8. Some long meetings. We didn't always agree, but we debated it pretty well line for line and listened to our submitters. The revaluation one was more difficult. And look, I was probably one that was a bit sceptical about how we were doing things, but it is what it is, and we went out with the average being around 11.2%. I don't think it's 4 point. I think we're more like 6% at a residential average, and I'd be correct in saying that. What are we talking, Steve?
Mr Mayor, Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager Finance. Yes, what we can say is that approximately that the increase for the residential sector in total is about 6% in terms of the total sum we're seeking from the residential sector, compared with about 5.4 for the commercial industrial sector. So that's the increase in the grand total. If you were looking at what we call the average rate for the average single unit ratepayer, based on what we determine as the average land value for one of those, which has increased to 468,000, and that increase for that is 4.6%. And obviously a lot of variations around that, as we've shown you in the other material.
Okay, that's fine. So look, that's the headline numbers. I think it was important that we did get that out for people to have some sort of clarity and understanding. Look, I'm going to support the majority's view. I'm not like Councillor Harper. I'm not going to sit here and relitigate things. I don't think there's any value in doing that. And we need to approve a budget, a plan, and set the rates. We've legally got to do that. But I just would signal a couple of concerns. The capital program, we haven't got a lot of clarity over that, and I just would ask the officers that they keep an eye on that. We've been given assurance that we're going to deliver what will be our biggest, and we'll be watching that and look forward to that improvement. Also, I didn't support the putting extra money at this stage. I had an open mind, but at this stage into the Civic Master Plan, I think we've got some way to go on that, and I thought it was slightly foolish to put another 200,000 in immediately when we actually haven't even seen what we're getting for the first couple of stages of 500,000. Do we need the plan? Absolutely. But let's hold our consultants accountable rather than paying them extra before we've seen what we're going to get. But look, in summary, I think this has been really challenging. We've got to where we've got. I know other councils are struggling around the country. Councillor Finlay's right, we are getting reform on reform on reform from central government. Most of those reforms actually add extra cost into the system. So we have some challenges going ahead in the coming years. The system is somewhat overloaded, and when that happens, things start to break. But we are where we are, so I will support the majority view and ask you that you support setting a budget and plan and ultimately the rates. Thank you. Right, moving on, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to begin with, like others, I just want to acknowledge the staff who have prepared the work for us, particularly the ones who had to respond to queries that we were sending through the night before meetings, sometimes the morning of the meetings, and actually the turnaround time for information has been quite swift. So yeah, that has certainly been appreciated. I think the Mayor's pointed out that this has probably been the hardest annual debate in the last 9 years that we've experienced, and I would agree with that. I think there's been very thorough debate, which has been tedious at times, let's be honest, and really what I've seen is a more intense approach with scrutinising this annual budget than any that I have experienced before, which I think has been a really good exercise. It has been very draining, and I suspect elected members are very much looking forward to the recess in July. I certainly don't think I'm going to miss the line-by-line review in subsequent years, so I'll be watching from the sidelines. I am actually comfortable to support this today, and when I use the word comfortable, I'm not saying that I'm happy with where we're at and I'm happy with the increase, but actually I am really comfortable with the debate that we've gone through, the information that's been provided, the review that we have done, that actually where we have landed, we have used like every tool in our toolkit, right? We have really gone, I think, and explored every option to do what we can to alleviate some of the burden people are facing from the recent valuations. I would say that we know these valuations happen every few years. The valuation review itself is not a surprise. This is a normal process. But what we don't do when we set the long-term plan is actually have a discussion around the years that the valuations may displace some of our figures with rate expectations. And so I think that that would be a valuable exercise when setting the next long-term plan, is actually looking at the years that those valuations might hit. With the actual budget itself, I just want to acknowledge a couple of really positive programs I think we've got in there. One of them is the increase to the remuneration budget for staff. I've been very clear in my views that I think it's really important to look after the staff that we've got rather than trying to address issues with vacancies. And so I do actually think that we will see a material difference in what we are able to do as an organisation by addressing some of the remuneration shortfalls that we've got. The technology in the chamber was a very small budget line in comparison to some of the other pieces of work, but those who have and regularly participate online will carry a higher level of frustration than those who attend in person. And whilst some of the focus is making sure that people other than elected members and staff have a good experience when engaging with our meetings, there are going to be huge benefits to elected members who currently can see very small spots on their screen, probably don't know where my voice is coming from within the council chamber, and often when people are reporting, they see the back of their head. So I do think that there are going to be benefits with that. The tree planting for shade, consolidating a budget, bringing it forward to see some good outcomes that will benefit us in future. Again, that's not new money, that's bringing forward money that was in subsequent years within the 10-year plan, because we know that planting trees now will see the benefits much sooner. And finally, the other one I just want to highlight is the response to the submission from the Awapuni community around some place-based village kind of planning approach within that community. And again, in the scheme of the wider budget, it is small numbers, but it is things that make a big difference within our communities. And so I just want to acknowledge people who made submissions, some in response to these items particularly, but also people who have made submissions in previous years. Because my view is that when it comes to decision making, I don't think that we should just take a snapshot of the feedback that we've heard in the last couple of months. I think we actually know that we've had feedback from communities, some of them for years and years, and some of them through other avenues, whether they're bylaw reviews or long-term plans that feed into these programs. So I just want to acknowledge that. Again, I am very comfortable to support this today, and also want to acknowledge elected members who did survive many hours of line-by-line debate multiple times. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me start by acknowledging and thanking the community for their feedback and officers for their part of the hard work we all have done in bringing up this document. Obviously, some of us have worked harder than the others, and this is only my personal observation, and I accept that. Some of us don't want to be called politicians while they are behaving like politicians, and some of us wanted to be called politicians, but probably they were not behaving like politicians. To me, it all depends on willingness to work and then determination on part of the team. And then it is our job to provide confidence and support to the team. I just want to say a few words about the capital program, and I'm wondering when the staff is assuring us and saying that they are capable, and I believe that they are capable of executing the projects. Some of my colleagues are declaring it as unrealistic, the capital program. So I was wondering whether if 2 or 3 out of 16 are not satisfied with the program, should we declare it unrealistic, or should we consider the other 12 or 13 people who think that this is deliverable and this is realistic? So, I mean, listening to the debate from both the sides, I think we have done a very good job, and I'm quite satisfied with the current levels of the figures in the given circumstances, and I'm happy to support the budget. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I too would like to acknowledge the staff and the councillors for, we got there in the end, and I think that's the main thing, so that's good. And we got there within the tools that we have, as people have mentioned, the toolbox, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of what's said, which I have already agreed with. There's been comments about the capital program's unrealistic. And I am not going to go through the list that I did previously. But when you look at that list and start breaking it down with activities, you start off at the top of the $95 million and you break that down to renewals and capital. So you get down to about 60. And these are approximations, so don't quote the figures. Then you start looking at the activities. And then, you know, under the activities is probably about 10 to 13 different groups of activities. So then break down your capital program, then you've got 10, 13, so you've got about 6 million for each activity. If you go into one of them, like the social housing one, which I mentioned, that's got quite a few million into it. So when you start breaking them down, there's not one project in there, or there might be one, but there's not one project in there that I would want to tell the staff to take out, because we may not be able to deliver it. I want to have a budget that if there's a possibility for growth or more housing, that we've got the budget there. If that budget, if putting 10 extra million of capital budget in there meant a significant rate rise, then yes, I'd look at it. But when you're looking at capital budget, if you don't spend that money in that year, and the way it's budgeted, it's very small increase on that rate rise. But if it meant by not putting that budget in that we're not going to get these things delivered, then I think that's poor form. As I say, all those projects that I debated on, and I won some, I lost some, but at the end of the day, collectively, they are all important. So there's not one budget line in there that I would say, let's take out. So yeah, at the end of the day, we might end up with $10 million not spent, but at the end of the day, if we don't put that budget in there, it's never going to happen. So let's give the staff the budgets and especially the remuneration for the staff, because looking ahead, it's going to cost us huge amounts now for specialised staff. So all these are going to be increases. We've looked at increases and things like roading, 30% increases in roading. Look at our animal shelter, the increases in that. So we've got to have those budgets. So if you look back and say, well, yeah, last year 50 million, this year it's probably the same amount of work that we're doing, but it's now going to cost us 60 million. So overall, I'm comfortable where we are, and I'd just like to thank the staff again.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to be very brief because a lot has been said already. I'm happy to support this, this budget, and I think I have to acknowledge that being a new councillor, this has been a baptism of fire, I have to say. Having to do the line-by-line stuff that we have to do, cut and defer some projects, but I'm happy to support what in my eyes seems like a very well-balanced budget, while I'm also concerned about the rates increase. But we have to be honest with ourselves. We have done whatever we could within the legal framework to cut and defer certain projects. But it must be noted that this was needed. And if we don't, then we run the risk of paying even more in future years. For example, we have a lot of stuff happening at the moment. Inflation, interest rate rises, and the COVID-19 situation as well, which has affected global trade and a number of stuff. Prices going up because of the unpredictability of the current environment that we're currently living in. So I just wanted to say that if we do not support this or capital projects that we have put in place, the funding that we've put in place, that we run the risk of paying even more, spending even more in the future. So I don't think it's a good idea to sort of kick the can down the street and hoping that things will fix itself. But it's about taking actions now and making sure that we deal with the situations now rather than paying more and having future generations or ratepayers paying more in future years. So I'm very happy to support this. And in closing, I just want to acknowledge the staff for their work and the hard work that they've done throughout this very difficult process as well. And also want to acknowledge the public for the submissions, the submissions that have been very engaging, especially on the issues of rate rises. And I've seen a lot of people being vulnerable and sharing their experiences with us, and also giving us some lessons around rates, and which will feed into future conversation around the sort of system that we use in the future, whether to move from land to capital rate valuation or any other options that might be available to us. So in closing, I just want to acknowledge the staff and also acknowledge the public for the engagement and also the submissions on this in this annual budget. And a lot of the conversation that we've had over days of consultation and also hours of discussing this will feed into future conversation, and is very much valuable and appreciated. So I just want to leave it at that.
Thank you, councillors. Right, just a quick writer reply. Thank you for all your comments, and again acknowledge everybody that's fed into the process, and ask for your support in approving this budget and plan. Just a couple of comments. Just remind people that we are rating people for programs. There's been a couple of comments that we'll just defer that and we'll push that 10 million along. I would challenge councillors and officers, that maybe doing less is an option in this current environment. I visit lots of councils, and in my role on National Council, I ask lots of questions around some of this stuff, and we're doing stuff that is quite different to others, and I do challenge, that. We become real price takers in that sense. So trying to attempt everything at once could be very challenging, but we're assured that we're going to get there from the advice we've been given, so we'll watch that with interest. Again, thanks for all the comments. I'm not going to say I'm comfortable with this by any means. This has been really challenging, and but we had few levers, and I do think we've done well to get through. And as Councillor Beattie said, at the end of the day, we've got there. In a sense, we have. And in Councillor Butt's terminology, I'll ask the team to vote, please.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, could we separate 1 and 2?
Yes, we will. Just ignore what's come up. It's coming. Sarah.
Mayor, I thought I'd seize the opportunity to just tell you the figures. Excluding growth, our capital new spend is 41% of the budget, and renewal spend is 73% of the budget.
And growth, 4%.
As I say, we have changed how we've put growth in the future budgets to make it more practicable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, right, we've got the first resolution there, clause 35-22, finalising the annual budget plan for 2022-23, recommendations 1 and 2 from our Committee of Council meeting the 15th of June 2022. I'll ask you to vote, please, on this. And that has passed 13 votes for and 2 against. All right, we now go to the recommendations, voting on recommendations 3 to 6. I ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. We'll now break till 5 to 11 and just want to acknowledge former councillor Adrian Broad, who's popped in to see how rates are being spent in the city. Welcome. All right. We'll, for those online, we'll be back on into the chamber at 5 to 11. Thank you. comments or questions from anybody? No. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Steve. All right, councillors, we've got setting of the rates for 2022-23. Two resolutions in front of us there around number one, that the resolution to set rates for the 2022-23 year attached as Appendix 1 be adopted, and that two, that it be noted that the setting of the rates is a significant decision within the parameters of the LGA Act, and that it is satisfied there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. So I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to alert you to the fact that the sound was not on at the start of the meeting, and it only came on as Steve left from his presentation position. So are there any significant comments that we would need to know before voting on this issue?
No.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comments? As Steve alluded to, really we are formalising what we've just really adopted in terms of the annual budget. So it is legislative in nature that we resolve to set the rates formally. So look, I'm happy to move that, and it's been seconded by the Deputy Mayor. There being no further comment, I think we will vote. Thank you. That has passed. 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, moving on to the borrowing side. This is number 9. Again, a memo from Steve Patterson, our Strategy Manager of Finance. It's around the resolutions to authorise borrowing. It's page 41 of your papers, councillors. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and councillors, again, this is a very I suppose, routine, in a sense, report in that it's giving us, as the staff, the authority to organise the council's borrowing requirements during the next 12 months based on what you've approved in the annual plan. And as I've mentioned in the past, we don't borrow unless we need to, so we have facilities in place that enable us to manage council cash flows from week to week, day to day, etc. But from time to time, in an environment where our overall debt is increasing, as our budget has proposed that it will, then we do need to go to the market and raise further funds. And these series of resolutions enable that. And the second point is you'll be aware that a month or two back you approved a relationship with the airport company for them to raise funds through the council as well. So I've made specific a resolution here that recognises that and recognises that anything that we borrow on their behalf and on lend to them is in addition to the sums that are mentioned here, just so that it's clear. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Steve. So I suppose the key operative here is we borrow only if needed, and you were saying that we do that on a need-to basis, whether that's on every week we look at that, do we? How does that work?
Well, we manage the council's cash flows on a daily basis and have what's sort of like a revolving mortgage, if you like, in place for day-to-day cash flows. But from time to time, we have elements of the current debt portfolio that are maturing, and so we have to refinance those. But also, we're just projecting as best we can weeks ahead what cash outflows are going to be as a result of the capital program that we're spending. And that's a difficult task at the moment, as we know, to keep a handle on that and try and decide when it's appropriate to raise that, and to do so at a time when the local government funding agency is in the market tendering for funds and the like. So as a matter of interest, we will be participating in the tender next week that the local government funding agency we have, but in this case it's for funds for the airport company and none for ourselves at the moment.
So on that, we're raising most of our debt from the LGFA?
Yes, all the long-term debt at the moment is being raised through them. We've got these shorter-term facilities through the banks that are the revolving mortgage-type facilities, but the rest's all through the LGFA.
And what's that ratio? I mean, are we, the amount of money we raise from banks is small?
We try to keep that very small. We've got good-sized credit lines, about $43 million in the end in terms of credit lines, and that's a prudent level of credit lines from them, but they're in the nature of really standby lines. One of them is. The other one's one we use on a day-to-day basis because of the cash flows as they move around. But yes, if it gets beyond $5 or $10 million, then we're looking to borrow long-term.
And what's our average percentage? What are we in the market for?
How much would we be borrowing at any one time?
Well, no. What's our interest rate?
Oh, well, that's changing a lot over the last little while, and we haven't borrowed any new money in recent times, but we do borrow mostly on a floating rate basis, which means that the rates do move with the changing 90-day bank bill rate. And we have, as you'll be aware, a way of fixing some of that through these other tools, the swap tools and things that we have. So at the moment, interest rates are certainly increasing, and I'm not sure what that would cost if we were borrowing today, right now.
Okay. All right, open it up for some questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. My question is around the kind of inflationary pressure that we're facing, cost of money and use of floating and swaps. So are there points at which we would be changing our approach there in terms of, and what sort of advice or information is that informed by?
Yes. I engage a specialist company to assist with managing that portfolio, and we meet regularly to discuss the strategy about what we should do, and obviously that's all driven within the council's overall treasury management policy. So even as far as yesterday, I was discussing with them whether our policy was fit for purpose right at the moment, and they believed that the settings we had in the policy was still appropriate. And so within the marketplace, we're looking at options as to when and how we would stay within policy settings, given the interest rate. So we're doing that more or less formally monthly, but at all times really keeping an eye on what's happening in the market, and if there's something that we should be taking advantage of or doing in a proactive way, then that's something that the advisors that I have are coming to me with actively to do that.
Thank you. Have we been with that same advisor group for a long time?
We have, yes. There are a couple of firms involved in this sort of work for local government, and we compare them from time to time, but we have been with the current providers for a while, yes.
Thank you for that context, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Steve. Look, I'm sorry if I missed it in the report somewhere, but 2.6 on page 43, the council's liability management policy and borrowing limits. Are these governed by Local Government Act? And if yes or not, how would you compare it with some of the other councils?
Those ratios that we have there as part of that policy are ones that have become reasonably standard within councils of our size, and although they're not strictly the same as those used by the local government funding agency, they are similar. And in terms, for example, of the one which has a 200% limit for the percentage of total debt to total revenue, we've set that, or you've set that as the council as a prudent sort of level of limit, but the local government funding agency would, it currently has maxima that are up as high as 280%. So in our case, this is not uncommon, ratios of this sort of level.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Steve, on page 43 under bullet point 2.9, it talks about the full year servicing the additional debt cost would be 1.85 million, but provision has only been made for 0.6 million of that in this year, which is around a third. I had thought that traditionally that half the debt cost was attributed to the first year. I'm just wondering, are you able to give us some understanding of why only a third has been allocated?
Yes, well, you're right. Traditionally, we did have the first year with half of the year's assume that we're going to borrow progressively through the year, if you like, more or less in a straight line, and therefore provide interest at 50% of the total for the year. But last year, we, as a way of trying to moderate the impact on the rates, we looked hard at when the likely new borrowings would be and decided that it was we could allow less, and so we provided for about a third of it. And so this year, we've done the same. It will depend, obviously, on the progress with the capital program as to whether whether that's a wise assumption or whether we should be allowing more. But for the moment, we've allowed a third.
So, with officers giving us a level of confidence that they're going to deliver 100% of the capital program, is it reasonable for us to only provide a third of the debt costs of that capital program?
Well, I guess that's a judgment call. In the end, we made the call that we thought it was appropriate that we could in this year, and if circumstances changed, just as if the interest rate changes, then we'd come back to the council and advise you about that. For the moment, we've made that assumption, though, and hope that it's reasonable. It turns out to be reasonable in the end.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Steve. There's no other comments. So, councillors, we'll just have a look at the resolutions. There's a number of them. I think we're going to split them into two lots. So we have resolutions to authorise borrowing that council resolves. I will just quickly read these out. So this is 1 to 4. That council authorises the CE to borrow in accordance with delegated authority up to 55 million, the borrowing of additional term debt by way of bank loan or loans or credit facilities or other facilities, or the issue of stock for the borrowing secured by debenture trust deed. 2, that council note the purpose of borrowing is the carrying out of continued programs identified in the annual budget 22-23 year. 3, that the council note that any sums raised and subsequently on lent to the Palmerston North Airport Limited pursuant to the loan agreement between council and the company will be in addition to the sums raised for council's own funding purposes. 4, that council note the security for the borrowing may be the charge over rates under debenture trust deed if the chief executive considers appropriate. Number 5, that council note the benefits of borrowing are that it will enable the council to carry out the programs identified in the annual budget while spreading the cost for those programs over time to recognise future benefits. The risk is that interest rates may be varied in the future, resulting in higher debt servicing costs to council. Number 6, council approve having regard to the Council's financial strategy, that it is prudent and reasonable to enter into the proposed borrowing for the reasons set out in this report. Number 7, that Council note that the raising of the borrowing will comply with the Council's liability management policy. And number 8, that Council note that the decision to borrow up to $55 million is a significant decision within the parameters of the LGA Act, and it is satisfied there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of that Act. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do struggle a little. I will be happy to. Well, I will approve. I'll vote to support these recommendations, as we do need to fund the programs that have been approved collectively by council. But I do feel that there's some mixed messages in perhaps some of the assumptions that underlie some of these decisions. On one hand, officers are saying, yes, we're confident that we're going to deliver all of the capital program. And then in other reports, we have a 33% haircut on the projections. In this report, we're only funding a third of the interest costs for the coming year. That would presume that 2/3 of the capital program are delivered in the final third of the year, I'm assuming. It's not a consistent picture, and I think if in fact the collective view is that councillors agree with officers that the full program can be delivered, then why are we only funding it in this way? Yeah, so I'm just raising that as a concern. It doesn't sit well with me, but certainly I'll support it because we do need to fund the programs that have been approved through the majority of the council. Thanks.
Councillors, are there any other comments? There being none. Please, if you could support this. I think the key aspect here, or a couple of aspects, are we are raising these funds, majority of them through the LGFA, and as Steve indicated, that is our best form of raising debt. We're fortunate that we're a stakeholder in that organisation, and it enables us to borrow money at a much better rate than the open market. So that is somewhat very helpful in these times. And 2, we're only borrowing if needed. I think that's a key. And yes, I have some concerns, as I've voiced in prior debates around the capital program, but I think the officers can always come back to us. So I think we've got to treat that at face value. So I'm happy to move this and ask for your support. I invite you to vote, please. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. Thanks. Right. We now look to our CCOs and their final statement of intents for the next 3 years. And first up we have Te Manawa Museum Trust and their final statement of intent. That's on page 45 of your papers. I'll ask Sarah to deputise there, and we've got a paper there from our governance manager. And just would like to acknowledge Janet Ellery, who's the Partnerships and People Manager from the staff of Te Manawa, and Caroline Tate, who's the Deputy Chair of the Trust Board. Caroline's online. Welcome, Sarah.
Good morning, all. I'm happy to take this report as read. There are members of Te Manawa available to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, Janet and Caroline online. Before I go to some councillors in the queue, thank you for the SOI. Just on page 59 and 60, working with your partners, and I note that that's always been a key outcome for the institution and critical to how the place runs. Everything's looking pretty good in that space, because it has been somewhat difficult in past years.
It is really good. We recently signed an MOU with TMAS to strengthen that relationship, and we're feeling really positive about that relationship and the relationship with the Science Centre Inc. as well.
New Zealand Rugby Museum, they've all looking good. Leases have been re-signed.
Jenna, could you respond to that?
We're working with the New Zealand Rugby Museum to bring the lease signing forward.
Right. Okay, and so that will happen?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Good, thank you. Okay, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and apologies for my messy attendance this morning. My best laid plans were no match for the fog of Christchurch. Question about 2.5 in the officers' report, which is referring to the Te Awa refurbishment and the scale of the external funding being sought for that. So officers queried that because it's larger than previous funding. And I just wanted to check in, and I hope maybe you can answer, Janet, about the scale of the funding as a proportion of the scale of the size of the project itself. How does that sit?
With the redevelopment of any semi-permanent or permanent gallery, there are significant costs. They are some hundreds of thousands, extending out to millions, depending on the content of those exhibitions. Te Awa is sitting in the hundreds of thousands category, and the board has approved for a business case to be completed by an external party for that, and that work is underway now, and we are expecting a report on that at the end of July, I believe.
So should we take from that the figures aren't yet finalised? You're waiting for that business case to go through the board?
We have an indication of what the costs are likely to be. The big unknowns there are in terms of what we find once we start deconstructing an exhibition space, and there are unknowns in relation particularly to the cave area and the potential need for adjustments to be made to things like air conditioning, sprinkler systems, etc.
So that opens another can of worms, I'm afraid, there, Mr Mayor, because those would seem to be landlord issues.
Potentially.
So you're expecting to have a conversation around that?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Thank you,
We're
Mr. Mayor.
working with our best estimates of what is there right now.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is regarding board's decision not to include performance measures around environmental sustainability in their statement of intent, and rather on page 57, which is page 9 of the attached report, they say that they are happy to mirror the Palmerston City Council's carbon reduction target of 30% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by 2031. My question is whether they have started measuring their gas, or on what basis they can say that they will reduce 30%. Do they know their current emissions?
Janet, can you respond to that?
Sure. In relation to environmental sustainability, we've had a lot of work that has been ongoing in this area for a significant amount of time. We have recently reviewed our environmental sustainability policy, and we have a series of actions that have arisen out of that. We have measured our emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and a report was produced for internal use in August 2021 that is informing all of the actions that we're planning moving forward. We've also had a lot of support from external funders in the last 5 years to changing out a number of areas of work in the museum that was not particularly environmentally sustainable.
So can I ask, Mr. Mayor, if that internal information can be shared with the councillors, the environment or the inventory?
If the board is happy to share that, we would be happy to share it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Take that back. We have a board meeting tomorrow night, so we can respond to that in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the report. I think my question is largely around trying to understand some of the stuff that are outlined in the report. And that's on page 60, and your relationship, in terms of your relationship with the Museum Society. I just want to understand if the Memorandum of Understanding is still in place. And you've also highlighted the activities undertaken around events of historical significance. Can you just highlight some of those things, just so I can understand some of the activities that you guys undertake under this MOU?
In terms of the status of the MOU, I would defer to Janet on that. I mean, I think one of the activities that springs to mind for me would be Museum in a Box, which has been a very successful initiative that has been taken into schools, and that's relating to Palmerston North history. But I'm sure that Janet can refer to some of the other initiatives taking place at the moment around that space.
In relation to the Museum Society, one of the real strengths of that relationship is the extent to which the Museum Society have offered their skills and knowledge. And a lot of the work that's been done under the MOU umbrella with the Museum Society is in relation to things like blog writing, doing history and research on particular aspects of our collection so that we can then translate those into events and activities. And so we have enjoyed a really strong relationship with the Museum Society in terms of the kind of content that we've been able to produce. Examples would include the history of doll making, for example, and that was translated into a curiosity learning program. There's been all sorts of work done in the toys and games area, and we'll shortly be starting on some exhibition development for that particular subject, which will go into the art gallery. I think it's in 23-24, and a whole host of other areas that the Museum Society have helped us with. Going forward, we have lots and lots of ideas. We have to figure out how to translate them. One of them is around Local History Week and taking Museum in a Box specifically out into the regions to start engaging more widely across Manawatu and Rangitike with those collections.
Cool. One more question, Mr. Mayor, for me. So this MOU was signed in 2012, so is it still in place?
We've had discussions with the Museum Society acknowledging that the MOU documentation is out of date. It hasn't stood in the way of ongoing cooperation and collaboration. There is a desire to readdress the formal MOU status, and we're currently in talks with the Museum Society about what that might look like. At this stage, I'm not in a position to be able to talk about any outcomes there.
Cool. I might have missed it in the report, but what is being done, for example? You talk about all the activities that you are undertaking of historical significance, including local history, for example. How is it being advertised or published, or how do we know about this? Because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people interested in wanting to know or being involved in these activities. How do you guys sort of promote this or market this in order to raise awareness to some of these beautiful activities happening?
We have recently had a piece of work done on our key audiences. We've acknowledged that in this area, as it is for all organisations, I think, that it is something that we want to improve on. Our current channels are both print media and social media. It is something that we continue to try to improve on. And so there is a marketing strategy that has been developed, and we're looking to implement that. One of the first activities was to bring on board more specific digital engagement and digital marketing expertise, and we have a position that starts at the end of July to help us with that.
Just a question on page 67, just around the finances, and look, it's the buckets seem to all add up. They just be in different lines. So the fundraising and sponsorship, is that moved into other revenue? Because is it all being combined at the top there under revenue?
That item, please. Is Catherine there?
Yes.
Thank you.
Apologies, yes it has.
Right, so it's that other revenue really should be fundraising, sponsorship and other revenue.
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
amend
cool.
that.
Just looked like there was no external money, that's all, it was just council.
Yeah.
But the numbers at the end add up. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from online or councillors? There being none, thank you. All right, we've got...
Thank you.
We've got the resolution there around Te Manawa Museums Trust Final Statement of Intent 2022 to 2025. The Council resolves that we agree the final Statement of Intent for 2022-25, Attachment 1, submitted by the Te Manawa Museums Trust. I'm happy to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And are there any comments? There being none.
Sorry, I was late on the button there, but I did just want to express again our thanks to Te Manawa and the board for the process. Going through this process might feel cumbersome, but it throws up questions even at this last stage where elected members want to get a clear line of sight into the activities and the intention behind those. So even though the bureaucracy can feel unwieldy, and we do recognise that, it is a useful process, and we thank you for your willing participation in it. Thank you.
Great. All right, we'll vote, please. Can everybody please vote online? Okay, that's passed 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. And thank you to Te Manawa for coming in. Right, move through to number 11 on our agenda, councillors, and this is the Regent Theatre Trust. Similar subject, their final statement of intent, and again, there's a paper there of page 83 from our governance manager, Sarah deputising. Over to you, Sarah.
I'm happy to take this report as read. The region have answered all of and responded positively to all of Council's recommendations. So, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Sarah, for being available to us to respond to questions here. I did have one around page 84, which is the table of how things have been dealt with in this statement of intent. And it's specifically around the performance measure around environmental sustainability, which is kind of about 2/3 of the way down there. The way that the SOI responds to it is, quote, assess the capability to improve the footprint of the theatre by producing during the coming year a professional report to PNCC similar to other CCOs. And I'm left at the end of that trying to understand what it is that's likely to be produced because I'm not aware of any other similar reports. Do we, at an officer level, have any understanding of kind of what's expected?
I believe the plan is to sort of assess their carbon or their environmental impact of the Regent, similar to what Te Manawa did last year, where they did a report on the carbon capture of the building.
Thanks, that's helpful. So that's kind of the report that was alluded to that sits with the Te Manawa board at this point that we may or may not get a hold of. Right. Great. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following on in a similar vein, Sarah, it's something that's come through from the Regent Board before, and I think from other CCOs, where we're requiring a step up in that kind of reporting into things like environmental measures, even in biculturalism or diversity, inclusion. I know the boards have asked for support from council, and I don't see that reflected in any way here. There's just an assumption that a report will be done from the board's own resources. Are you able to comment on that?
I believe the boards are sort of taking in the best method they can, working out how they can manage these expectations of council. And so instead of including a performance measure or something straight away, they want time to just reflect and to report back and to consider how best they could measure those additional requirements in the future.
So is it fair to say that council's working to support the boards in doing that work?
Yes, officers are going to be working with the boards in our quarterly CCO management meetings we have with them.
Thank you. Thank you. That's encouraging.
All right. No further questions? All right. Thank you, Sarah. So, councillors, the Regent Theatre Trust final statement of intent. Council resolves and agrees that the final statement of intent 2022 to 25, attachment 1, submitted by the Regent Theatre Trust, that we resolve and accept that. I'll look to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we will vote, please. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we move through to number 12, and again, for the Globe Theatre Trust this time, their final statement of intent for 2022-25. We have a paper there on page 103, or memo, sorry, and that's from our Governance Manager, Sarah, deputising. Over to you again.
Thank you. I'm happy again to take this paper as read. The Trust Board have answered all of Council's recommended changes and revised their statement of intent appropriately. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll open it up for any questions. No, there doesn't seem there is. This one's relatively straightforward. Thank you. Okay, so I'll now look to move this around the Globe Theatre Trust final statement of intent for 2022-2025, that we resolve and agree that the final statement of intent 2022-25, attachment 1, submitted by the Globe Theatre Trust, be accepted. I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And again, I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we will vote. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. Right, we move through to our last item of our part 1 part of the meeting, and that's number 13, the Council Work Schedule on page 125. And that is, 125. I'll find the paper. I'll open it up for any questions or comments of officers. Okay, there being none, we'll look to receive the work schedule dated 29th of June 2022. I'll move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments? No, we will vote. Thank you. Okay, thank you. That's passed 16 votes for, none against. Right, we move through to recommendations from various committee meetings in the last month. Number 14 is our presentation of Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee, recommendations from their June 8th meeting. And I'll ask the Chair, the Deputy Mayor, to speak to that. It's page 127 of your papers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move that the Council adopt the recommendations from Planning and Strategy Committee meeting on the 8th of June.
And seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you, Deputy Chair. Right, any matters arising from that? There being none, we will vote. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. Number 15 is around a presentation of Part 1 Public Community Development Committee recommendations from their 8th of June meeting. And it's on page 129 of your papers. I'll ask the Chair online, Councillor Johnson, to speak to this, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the recommendations from the Part 1 Public Community Development Committee meeting of the 8th of June 2022 be adopted.
And we have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Deputy Chair, are there any comments to this or matters arising? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't want to speak, but I just want to separate under 12.22, which was the recommendations from the Health Coalition, A2, which is the wind down of alcohol advertising and sponsorship of sport. I'd like to just separate that to oppose that part of that tranche of recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We'll just do that. And the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to request 1222 in its entirety be taken separately so that I can abstain from that one as I had declared a conflict.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. So we'll just get that up. So that's in its entirety, that's it? So it's separating 12-22 around the Health Coalition. It's the whole. No, it's the whole. Yeah. Oh, do you? Okay. Okay. All right. We'll do that.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just on that, that's actually just the content of their presentation, not necessarily whether we agree with it or not. Like it's an overall thing, which is obviously a private member's bill. So it's just the content of it that Councillor Dennison seems to be objecting to, which.
Yeah, okay. I think I'll accept that, and happy with the Deputy Mayor's request to have it separated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so backing up the bus, we'll take the whole of the clause, 12-22. Right. Okay, so we've put that up there now. I wasn't present at the meeting, or that part of the meeting, and I just would like to say that I can recall, and some around the table will recall when tobacco went through this process. There's a big difference in this one. There was a smoke-free government campaign that came through to support sporting clubs, and as they exited, and sporting associations as they exited tobacco sponsorship, and it progressively, in fact, it affected Palmerston North. I know the netball, the cricket, and the rugby obviously were affected, and they had smoke-free funding for a period, and then it wound down as the years went on to virtually non-existent. And the commercial sector stepped up. This is quite different. This is at the edge of the cliff, and it all stops. So I'm not going to support it either. I just feel that would be putting a lot of our clubs at risk. I don't disagree with what they're trying to do. It's the manner in which they're doing it. If there was a fund which could wean our clubs or make our clubs, help our clubs survive, and associations, then I would support that. But the current one I won't. Councillor Johnson.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Mayor, and I understand you weren't at the meeting, but that issue was, to my memory, discussed at the meeting, and we were told that the expectation in the bill was that there would be a transition period for sponsorship of sport, and that it's only televised sport that would be affected, not local clubs. So I appreciate that that's not clear just from reading the recommendation, but there was a lot more detail in the meeting. So local clubs would not be affected. It would be televised sport, and there would be a wind down period. It wouldn't just stop. So just to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Those questions were asked on television, and they were different answers given. So, but anyway, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Councillor Johnson has just said, and that is this particular bill has been carefully constructed to make sure that there is a lengthy weaning off in terms of sponsorship for clubs, and they've been very particular in that regard. So that just needs to be underlined so that people are very clear about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. All right. Okay, we'll get the resolution back up. And this is around clause 1222, around the Health Coalition's private members bill, supporting the private members bill. So I'll ask you to vote, please. And that is passed, 9 votes for, 2 against and 5 abstentions. Okay, thank you. We now go to the substantive, and that's around the other recommendations being 14.22 and 15.22. And if there's no further matters arising from that, I'll ask you to vote, please. That has passed, 15 votes for with 1 abstention. Thank you. Okay, we move through to number 16, which is presentation of Part 1 Public Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from their meeting of the 22nd of June 2022. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to this, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'd like to move the recommendations from the Part 1 Public Finance and Audit Committee meeting, recommendations from the 22nd of June 2022 be adopted.
And looking for the Deputy Chair to second this. Councillor Naylor? Yes, she does, thank you. Online, thank you. So we have the resolutions there, councillors. It's on pages 131 and 132. I'm not going to read them all out other than clause 4522 is around the airport statement of intent, clause 4622 is around the Audit New Zealand recommendations, and clause 4722 and 4822 are around community centre leases for Bunnythorpe and Awapuni. No comments, no matters arising. We will vote, please. And that has passed, 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. We now look to exclude the public from the meeting for reasons around confidentiality and privacy. And I'll ask members of the public to vacate, please. And I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Dennison.
Mr Mayor, just for the public record, I did declare this at the meeting, but for item 19, which is actually relating to negotiations, I want to declare an interest and I'll withdraw for that item. Just making that in the public part of the meeting. I missed it when you first called for conflicts.
Right.
But item 19, which relates to negotiations for awarding that contract, I'll declare an interest and withdraw from the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to leave the room as well? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I'm just kicking you out. It's fine. All right, we're going to vote. Thank you. Okay, it's passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we'll now exclude the public. I'll give us a minute to switch things off and lock the doors.